Welcome to the fourth episode of the Gene Keys Conversations and Guidance Space here on the CWS podcast. In our global teamwork with Elida, Tanmayo, Katrini, I'm today joined by Jesse Chesnutt, who is a creative team member and a guides manager of Gene Keys, living in Colorado in the United States of America. We have a rich conversation where we will explore the gene keys, the I Ching, contemplation, and transformation through understanding and the power of forgiveness. So for those of us who have something to let go of and forgive, I believe I am with an expert today, and we will do our best to guide and share the knowledge and the wisdom, and most of all, for myself, my enthusiasm for the gene keys and what this transmission has given me, and my desire to be part of guiding and sharing other people in this. I think we can all agree, and we are in quite transformational times. So being able to transform and maybe guide other in that process is a good thing. So welcome, Jesse. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Sven. It's really a delight to be here. And yes, much change is afoot in the world. And I just love these systems of knowledge and understanding that can help guide those changes and really allow the transformation to be as graceful and authentic and deep and nourishing as possible. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah. Let's begin with setting the scene for those who may be tuning in. And let's explain, if you could explain, Jesse, what are the gene keys and what is the art of contemplation?
Well, it's one of those kind of sprawling systems that can be difficult to describe in one sentence, but it is a really beautiful system. I like to um, understand it that there are 64 fundamental archetypes that the universe uses to create all life, intention, movement, patterning. And so the gene keys is based in a very ancient system of understanding from the Taoist tradition known as the I Ching. And so 4,000 years ago, these Taoist wizards unlocked that there were these fundamental energies, which were like these blueprints of life that they described could create and model all of the interactions of all of life. And so 4,000 years later, we decoded DNA and realized that there are literally 64 letters in the language of DNA. And so there's this great correlation of this very ancient knowledge and this very fundamental knowledge of life, that literally all of life is written in 64 fundamental codes. And so the gene keys kind of rests in the confluence of many of these different systems. And it's not just the I Ching or just the DNA, but many types of psychology, philosophy, and self-understanding, helping to understand, the nature of the mind, the nature of the heart, the nature of the body, the nature of the subtle bodies, the nature of consciousness and life itself. And so it's a very beautiful tool that I feel is kind of like a self-divination tool. These 64 fundamental patterns are like mirrors that reflect certain parts of our nature back to ourselves and then to each other. So it's also a beautiful system that once we learn it to know ourselves, we can start to know some of our relationships, some of the strangers and political figures even that we meet in life. We can go back and, pull the charts of our ancestors or famous historical figures and gain some insight, these mirrors of consciousness that can kind of reflect back some of our hidden fundamental nature. And so it's really a synthesis. The gene keys is a synthesis of many things. There's a lot of alchemy and hermetic wisdom, There's some like Gnostic Christianity, there's some Buddhism, there's some sort of Jungian mythology, there's some hard numbers and a lot of like technical things, but there's also a very simple and authentic heart at the heart of it. A very beautiful and profound way of not getting caught up in all of the complexities and all of the numbers and all of the bells and whistles, but right at the heart of the Gene Keys is this art of contemplation. It's a really beautiful, tiny book that is and way of really being with life, being with ourselves, being with this moment. And so all of those complexities, all of those systems can kind of rest, and it's really about coming into presence, coming into this moment. And that's the real magic where we can transform challenges or things that we don't really might not like or enjoy quite as much, and to really sit with them. And this is where the beauty of alchemy kind of comes in, of when you have an uncomfortable shadow, we call them in the Gene Keys, these sort of lesser traits of challenging, fear-based kind of survivalistic tendencies, that by sitting and being in presence with those cities, not running away from them or pushing them away, but just really being in presence with them, there's this amazing space for opening and transforming. And so it's really been a beautiful journey to really go into that simple heart at the core of the Gene Keys, and to really trust that the mirrors and the numbers and all of the complexities are fun, but to really be present with the simple heart at the core of things and at the core of self is really kind of been the most fruitful and useful aspect of my traveling with the Gene Keys transmission.
I'd like to invite you to share what do you do as part of the creative team with Gene Keys, and what do you do as a guides manager? What does it translate into?
Well, I kind of do many different things and have sort of had my hand dabbling in lots of different parts of the Jingis team. I feel really blessed to have a passion, a deep passion of mine. I was a Gene Keys nerd before I was a Gene Keys employee. And so I started, my foot in the door was at the on the Pulse team. And so I was working with the social media team and creating some of the weekly Pulse is the newsletter that goes out, the love letter to our community that goes out every time the transit changes into a new Gene Key. So it's every 6 days about. And so that was my entry point in. And I was a Gene Keys guide at the time, and so I was especially connected to this guides community, being a guide myself before being an employee. And so that has been that role for me has really expanded. And so now I'm blessed to work as the guides manager. And so I do a lot of, I host a lot of the calls for the guides, but I'm also part of the infrastructure of the tech team to build the guides directory and these new adjunct offerings, which are part of the Gene Keys website. So I'm sort of a liaison between the guides community and the goings-ons inside the team. And so I feel really blessed to be able to serve so many amazing, brilliant Gene Keys guides who are, there's no um, firm barrier for entry. So it's not like you have to go through a bunch of accolades to become a guide. There's just a pathway to essentially devoting yourself to embody the transmission, to study it for a period of time and to go deeper. And so this community of guides really is a global community of people who heed the call to, um, to study the Gene Keys at a deeper level, and then to want to bring it into their business, into their family, into a professional, avenue in some ways, So it's really amazing. And so I'm feel really blessed to sort of help guide the guides, which I find a fractal in itself. This notion of guiding guides is a um, something that I think is one of my sort of guideposts for my function there. But I still am connected to the creative team in many ways, where I do a lot of the video processing and website design and implementation. And so it's kind of it's nice. It gives me an opportunity to really embody some of my keys. And so my purpose key is the has the gift of competence. And so competence is this gift that no matter what comes your way, you have a way of responding competently. And so I find myself being able to practice that in many ways because as a manager of a community, when an issue arises, I need to respond to that. When someone needs a small favor, I respond to that. When there's a big, going on, I respond to that. And when there's a little detail over here or a big piece over here or creating a new vision of what the future of the guides would look like, there's many different ways of responding. And so I find that um, really empowering and sometimes challenging in just the right way, right? Like when life brings many different opportunities to respond, I respond very well to that. And so my role has kind of shifted a bit over time and will continue to, as is the nature of change. We've been sort of joking around when you create a business around the Book of Changes, which is the name of the I Ching, and this notion that all things must change. And one of the great philosophies of the Gene Keys is that we're in the midst of the great change. We're a few months away from this pivotal time when biology, psychology, genealogy are, you know, the consciousness of the whole are going through this great change. And so, there's really a lot of change afoot in the world, a lot of change afoot in the Gene Keys for sure. We're in this place of really launching a new app, a new website, a whole new architecture and infrastructure of how we do things. Some things are coming to an end. Richard's calling this the year of the closing door. So there are many doors closing and then many things opening in a new way. And so it's part of the great adventure for sure. There's a lot of change afoot. And sometimes in life, change can be very challenging, especially around home, around work, around finance and daily habits and rituals. The human organism doesn't necessarily always deal with change with joy and excitement. Sometimes we do. Sometimes there's a bit of resistance and like, oh gosh, I just wish it was the same, or comfortable. And so sometimes change can bring those challenges. And yet, studying the I Ching and the Gene Keys and just really trusting in that art of contemplation that can transform challenge into treasure, like it can transform these elements of fear of the unknown into actually a joy to express and to trust in the unknown. And so, yeah, it's not without its challenge sometimes, all this change, and yet it really does feel um, like beautiful and guided by the transmission, by the energies of the I Ching and by the beautiful Gene Keys transmission as well.
Yeah. I think, Jesse, let's just, if you could just maybe expand a little bit on when we have the shadow and the gift and the city of each gene key. Could you expand a little bit more just for people who might not be so familiar then?
Well, it's one of the most beautiful aspects, I think, of the Gene Keys, and it's quite simple, and yet it's very large in its scope of how it can help our real life experience with some of these keys. So there's 64 fundamental keys that are these 64 patterns, but each of these keys, every one of the keys, has what's called three frequency bands. And so what it means is that one energy can have three very different manifestations. And they're all connected. They're all the same thing. And so every key is made up of a shadow, a gift, and a city. And there is a sort of natural progression where the shadow is of a lower frequency. The gift is of a middle frequency, and a siddhi, which is a Sanskrit word for divine gift or power, is the highest frequency. And so there's this natural understanding from the Western logical mind that, shadows are bad or they're less than. They're these negative traits, and it's very easy to see them that way. Doubt, confusion, psychosis, uh, intolerance, chaos, on and on and on. There are these 64 shadow states are these archetypal forms of challenge, of addiction, of habit, of a victimized state that has developed over hundreds of thousands of years through our genetic kind of evolution as humanity into these sort of survivalistic states. And so some of these can be quite challenging, like to receive to when you get your chart, which if you are interested in the Gene Keys, it's a beautiful portal to enter. If you just go to genekeys.com, there's a banner at the top, free profile. And so anyone can, with their birth information and place, can get their own profile. And what it does is it gives you this somewhat complex map, this hologenetic profile. It is this beautiful geometric kind of impression of you and your life's journey that's unique to each person. And each one of these keys that's on this profile will have these shadows, these gifts, and these cities. And so it can be a lot of information up front when you get your profile, and when you look at some of these shadows, they can be quite abrupt or quite challenging, because oftentimes, if we think of these keys as mirrors, the mirror of the shadow is oftentimes an unwanted mirror. Oftentimes we don't want to look at the unconscious aspects of ourselves, or the rough, the harsh, the unrefined, the sort of those less than parts of ourselves that haven't that aren't maybe necessarily as integrated or as polished as other parts of ourselves. So these shadows can be kind of a stumbling block or a really challenging gate for entry. But perhaps one of the most beautiful aspects of the gene keys is knowing that because you have a shadow in your chart, or you're contemplating one, or it's up for you, doesn't mean that you're cursed or broken and that you're less than, that you have this shadow, because every shadow contains a gift. And so here's a really profound piece of wisdom that oftentimes in some traditions of self-knowledge and healing, or recovery, or whatever, psychology, what is told to us is that these shadow patterns are negative, and that we need to remove them from our life. We need to take them and not think about them. We need to remove them from our feelings. We need to remove them from our body and be gone with them. And that's not the way of the gene keys and many other beautiful systems too. There is this notion of including and integrating and learning from that shadow, and not wallowing in the shadow or being like, well, I'm just an addict and that's all I'll ever be, to use the shadow of addiction as a very obvious one. It doesn't mean that at all, that you should wallow in the shadow, but it doesn't mean that you should cast it away or cut it out. pretend it's not there, but by sort of going into the muck of the shadow and really looking honestly, there's a journey that we take that's first you allow it to be there, then you accept that there is actually a relationship between that shadow, and eventually you embrace that shadow. And so there's this three-part journey that the art of contemplation provides that allows for us to actually approach some of these shadows. And what happens is, as we honestly approach and develop a relationship with those shadows, there is a natural opening that is possible for these shadows. And what happens is that shadow is just a genetic imperative, a survivalistic tendency, a sort of unconscious, fear-based, sort of selfish or victimized state that once it's given its proper relationship inside, it really does have this sort of flowering or raising of a frequency that then opens up into a gift. And the gift is the same exact genetic pattern, the same psychological condition. It's just operating at a higher order, a higher dimension, a higher level of awareness that uses, instead of a fearful, patterned, unconscious, survivalistic tendency, it is an extension in service to the whole. And it recognizes, oh, that addiction that I had, that energy that seemed to be this pattern that I keep collapsing into, actually I can use that same energy, but I can actually be of service with that. And so this is the gift of invention. Instead of falling back into the same addictive patterns over and over, we can be addicted to inventing new things, to using it creatively to actually fill in the gaps of life. And this is where this powerful journey towards invention is, where it's like using that oftentimes in the recovery process, people will become addicted to recovery. They will become addicted, instead of addicted to drugs and alcohol or whatever it may be, they become addicted to being open-hearted and helping others find their way towards finding their unique ways of expressing. And so that's just one example of a shadow that can seem so brutal and difficult and like a curse that actually can open into this really great way of truly being in service. And then, so there's a long journey from the shadow into the gift, and the gift itself is this beautiful journey. It's a pathway unto itself of really, how can I be of service to the whole? How can I use my shadow traits in order to be of service to myself, to my family, to my community, and to the whole of all beings? And that will be different for every person, but to me, it's one of those codes that the Gene Keys provides that really cracks open this shift from negativity to positivity, from selfishness to service. And this is a real bridge that the world needs. Honestly, there's so much selfishness in the world, and it's kind of built into a lot of our logical, economical, political frameworks. And just this notion of not demonizing those things, but actually just bringing them into service is a key that opens a door to a higher way of being. And if anyone can do that individually and actually live in that way, there's a really transformative aspect to the whole world. And so just that journey from shadow to gift is just such a treasure, and it's really an amazing and powerful alchemical kind of journey. And then what happens is, as we refine that energy and learn how to express those gifts more authentically and naturally and freely into the world, we unlock our genius, our own unique individual expression of how we can truly serve the whole. And then there's this continued refinement up to the highest level where there is this divine gift, this divine seed, this very much enlightened kind of capacity inside even the gift. And that seed of the city lives in the midst of shadow as well. And so they're really, because they're one thing, each gene key has a shadow, a gift, and a city that are very different in their expression and their feeling in the world, and yet really they are united and connected. And the last thing I'll share on this is that I think is really important is I kind of built it as like there's this progression from the shadow is bad and it's where we are, where I am and where the world is. And then maybe if I'm a good boy and I raise my frequency, I can express my gifts and then I'll be better, and then I can look back and see how bad I was, and now I'm much better. And then I can look off into the future where maybe if I'm a really really good boy, I can become enlightened. I can be like a Buddha. I can um, have this divine gift, and then I'll be the best part of myself. And it's very easy to see that description. I'm kind of, tongue in cheek, showing that it's actually not like that for me, and that's part of the detrimental logical Western mindset of bad, better, and best that categorizes everything, and that actually everything, this goes back to Hermetic philosophy and think everything is in flux, everything is in vibration, even the desk, even the chair, even the crystal, the rock, the stone, everything is actually vibrating at its atomic nature, and it vibrates from high to low. And so literally everything is oscillating between city, gift, and shadow, the peak of the valley and the trough of the valley, the peak of the mountain, like literally everything is oscillating, including our experiential journey. So some days we fall into shadow, and that's okay if we can have the presence to remember it's about gratitude, it's about service. Oh, this too shall pass, and returning into that nature of the gift. This is the chop wood, carry water. The daily practice to me is remembering to, when I'm in a shadow state, that I can express a bit of service in the gift, and that brings me back. And even in those rarefied states where sometimes we have an epiphany, we have a breakthrough, there's a moment of cosmic awareness, perhaps, this moment where we feel the city come down. Even in those moments, okay, great, how can I do this in the world? What can I be with this, and can I share this somehow authentically? And so this, in this way, the shadow, gift, and city are not separate pieces. They're all really expressions of one thing.
Thank you very much for going deeper into that. And before we dive into and have a look at the hologenetic profile, I find the journeys fascinating. So tell me more about your journey and how you found the gene keys and how the gene keys found you and what were the stepping stones.
So I found the Gene Keys in 2014, um, from the recommendation of Adam Apollo, who was helpful in designing some of the website long ago, and it was like a homecoming for me. I really, when as soon as I just bought the book immediately on Amazon, and a couple days later it was there, and pulled my profile, and will never forget cracking open the book and reading my life's work, which is the fourth gene key, and this journey from intolerance to understanding to forgiveness, a very wide-reaching journey of the fourth gene key. And I'll just never forget it. Felt like a real coming home. And so I was pretty hooked immediately. But it wasn't until 2020 that I realized that there was a community around the gene keys, and that there was a rich group of people, and that there was actually access to hearing Richard Rudd give transmissions live in these retreats. And so that was another deeper level. I'm a studier, as you can tell by my bookshelf behind me. And so I spent a lot of time. I bought the book, and then I bought the Genius book and the Venus book and the Pearl book, these books that help guide you through your profile. They help unlock your keys and your journey. And so I studied for 5 or 6 years by myself before ever realizing that there was a real beautiful and amazing global community of people. And that was another much deeper level for the Gene Keys really coming into my life. Then in 21, the guides program opened, and I was broke at the time, and I was like, I don't know if I can afford it. And some intuition just said, like, this is not a decision that you get to make. Like, there was just this deep knowing that I had to join the program, and it was one of the best decisions for me. And that's where it really brought me into the deeper levels. And I was, blessed to become an employee for a small period of, very limited capacity. And then that capacity has grown, and I'm just grateful for that journey. But I think that the real thing that drew me to the Gene Keys, that made it feel like home when I first cracked that book, was I was deeply called into study of the I Ching. When the I Ching found me in 1999, it was a profound shift for me. And I found it through a girlfriend kind of passed it to me and said, "You got to check this out. There's these three coins, and you put them in your hand and just take some time, put your energy, put your intention into these coins, ask a question, and then just throw these coins 6 times. And this is how you're given a hexagram." And I was shocked that literally the question that I asked was a question I hadn't asked anyone. I'd never said out loud. It was nothing that I'd ever shared with anyone. And so logically, this book and these coins should not be able to tell me something that I literally haven't even ever said out loud. And it was right to the point. It was speaking so profoundly to like things that I hadn't even been willing to tell myself. And it was this real falling of this veil of the logic of, well, that's not possible, that this thing, magic's not really real. Oracles are kind of foolish. I was in university at the time, and all of a sudden, after this one kind of encounter with the coins in the I Ching, I had a tangible experience that magic and oracular power of consciousness are real. And it really led me on a deep journey um, uh, of deep study of sort of the esoteric or the ancient arts of the I Ching, but also of alchemy, of Taoism, of martial arts and energy cultivation, of sacred geometry, of Western esotericism, and all sorts of different spiritual traditions, and really sort of being drawn to many different pathways to knowledge. And so, and I'd had some very amazing experiences. I had my own sort of ecstatic awakening in 2000, where all of these studies sort of led to this very heightened kind of state of peeling back the layers of consciousness and having almost too much energy running into my system, where I just was like, oh my God, this magic is real, and it's powerful. And now how do I ground and integrate that? And so there was this sort of cornucopia of experience that were grounded in many sort of things throughout life, but never did I find a system that sort of gathered all of these things together into a very simple and complex and ranging system. And so when I really encountered Richard Rudd's words, his poetry, his ability to communicate these complex journeys into a simple and delicious and delightful and tangible language, it really felt like a homecoming um, of holding sort of those many jewels or many treasures in one coherent synthesis.
Amazing. I have this I Ching. I've got this myself, the Book of Changes. It's a little bit for me, it's a shelf development. I buy books and I shelf it. Yeah, I don't really know very much about the origin of the I Ching. Could you tell a little bit about this? How did it come into the world?
It's unknown exactly how old it is, and so the modern explanation is that it's at least, I think, 2,600 years old, or some of the shortest estimates. But if you look at the etymology of word and symbol and language, it 2,500, 2,600 to 4,000 to beyond is sort of things start fading into what is myth and what is fact and what is history. And so the lore is that it's much older than that, and I think that it's probably the case. 4,000 has been for those who aren't in the skeptic modern worldview, but are deep studiers of the I Ching. Many of them say it's 4,000 and even older. But basically, to mythologize it a bit, there was a sort of a wise man or a wizard, Fu Si is some as some call him, was a hermit in the mountains of ancient China before it was known as China, who were looking at the movement and measure of nature. So just basically trying to understand the way that nature moves and realize that there was two fundamental energies. There was the warm, sunny side of a hill, and there was the cold, shaded side of the hill, and that's where it originally that pattern of yin and yang were explored. But then quickly it becomes, oh yeah, there's all sorts of these divisions of energy, of day and night, of winter and summer, of expanding breath and contracting breath, and that all things are actually built from these two counter forces of yin and yang, much like the waves that we were talking, the highs and lows of frequency. And so if you put yin and yang together, there is one dimension of change. If you put that into two dimensions, so you can start to explore, then there become these four possibilities. If you put three dimensions of yin and yang together, now you have eight fundamental principles. And so that was the foundation of the Bagua, which was really these energies, these fundamental energies that sort of make up all things. And so there's heaven and earth. These are powerfully opposite forces. There's fire and water, which are two other fundamental and primal sort of yin and yang forces. But there are also these additions of mountain and lake, which are a bit more subtle and interconnected, but primal forces of nature, and then wind and thunder. And so these eight fundamental energies is what happens. These are the possibilities when you put yin and yang together in three different dimensions. And so this is written by these broken and unbroken lines of the I Ching. They're quite beautiful and a bit archaic, or there's an old fashioned because they've been around for 4,000 years or so. So if you continue this journey up in the fourth dimension, there's 16 probabilities. In the fifth dimension, there's 32 probabilities. And in the sixth dimension, all of a sudden there become 64 fundamental blueprints or energies. And this is the I Ching, was born out of that. And so at this point, there was a deep study over thousands of years. Some of the greatest scholars of the ancient world, both Western and Eastern, have studied and translated this. And there was a real belief at that point that these 64 fundamental impressions of energy were like the fingerprints of creation. These were the manifest forms that all of life would take. And to the Western modern mind, this seemed like a fairy tale or an old archaic thing. Like, how could these 64 fundamental things control all of life? That just feels like a myth or a fantasy. But when we unlock DNA, it turns out that all of life is literally built from 64 fundamental letters in the language of all of life. And so there's this unbelievable correlation. Literally, all of life is built in these 64 fundamental aspects. So where those overlap, the hard biology and genealogy, and this more mystical or consciousness-based aspect is really profound. But even here we are on a computer talking in the modern age, and all computers are built in binary language, which means either ones or zeros, or ons or offs, or yins or yangs. And so even our fundamental technology that seems so advanced and so futuristic is built in a 64 frame matrix of a binary language. And so to me, it really is one of the codes of all creation, and it's a master hack that can help us navigate technology and the potential future of humanity, but also our own nature of biology, mentality, psychology, spirituality. All of these things can nest in a sort of sacred geometric understanding that everything is not separate and disconnected. In fact, they're connected through a code. And there's many codes and many sacred numbers and ways of seeing and being in the world. But this 64 code is a fundamental archetype that really does unify many things. So with the I Ching, oftentimes it started as an oracle in some ways, or it has been used as an oracle, but it's not just an oracle to like picking a tarot card for the day. But it is often used in that way. Like, I'm about to start a new job. What energy can I expect to see from my new job? And you throw the coins, and it shows you an imprint of energy for today. And then oftentimes there's these changing lines, which will show you, okay, this is where the energy is today, and it's most likely to move here. And so by understanding that, you get to see some of the movement of the cosmos, the movement of these ways of that energy expresses. So it still can be used oracularly. Gene Keys has an oracle and is developing an even deeper oracle in our new tech, which allows you to consult the sage or consult these oracles. And there's something beautiful and meaningful for that. But it's not just this. It's not just some tarot deck or oracle kind of thing. It to me, it also rests in the deeper nature of being. And so with the Gene Keys profile showing you these signposts of these fundamental archetypes that express through your nature, it means that you have an avenue, especially with the shadow gift and city, to recognize, oh, right. When I'm in that shadow, I can actually express a gift. Like, there's some piece of me. So it's not just an oracle for the day. It's also helping us, come into a clearer sense of self. And it's beautiful because Richard Rudd has his description of these keys, but there are probably 1,000 different versions of the I Ching that have evolved over time. And some are quite large tomes that seem quite antiquated. Other are new tomes that are massive and bring a new aspect to the transmission. My first and potentially my favorite still is this tiny book by Brian Walker Brown. That is just, he's a Westerner that was in Boulder, Colorado, right near where I live. And he has this very tiny transmission that, to my Western mind, 27 years ago, really landed in a powerful way and still continues to speak to that simple treasure. And so there's many different ways that you can explore the I Ching, but that's some of them. Yeah.
Very wonderful, Jesse. I'm thinking before we dive into the hologenetic profile and look at your work, life's work, and yeah, just share the journey that the Gene Keys community is on at the moment with Golden Sage Retreat, and because we're going to go a little bit back in time in the
Yeah.
activations. The
Yeah,
context.
it's really exciting. We're in the midst of a deep journey. So, Richard Rudd, the founder and the poet, the bard, as many call him, is he's developed these journeys that move you through the profile. And they're broken into three main journeys. And there, just last year, there was the newest fourth journey called the Star Pearl that also emerged. But they're broken down into these sequences. And so you take these keys and you journey through your profile in a set rhythm, with, connecting one sphere for a month. And then you travel this pathway where there's this deeper calling of a mythical sort of meditation into another pathway, and you spend a month there, and then you go through this in this journey, and we do it collectively. And so these have been called our deep dive retreats. This journey is being headed up by Richard Rudd himself with Elijah and Tanmayo, and so the full team, the full teaching team is on board with many of our guides and ambassadors and Team 64 members also hosting and holding roles in this. So I think there was 6,000 people that went through the activation sequence, which is a huge amount of people, around the globe, and really all living in different seasons in different time zones. And so like this really amazing global community that's going through. And it's a beautiful journey. These deep dive retreats have been really special and spectacular. And there's a mix of transmission from Richard and Elijah and Tanmayo and some of our other guest hosts. So you get to hear the energy alive and sort of being transmitted through these different webinars. But then there's also opportunity to ask questions and to hear their reflections on that, as well as what we call community calls. And these are allowing the retreat participants to come together and to be able to share. And so this is a huge part of the community aspect of going through the keys and these retreats together is being able to share and then to listen to others share. And this is where a lot of, I think, some of the greatest insights come from that, you know, there's a conundrum with the Gene Keys is that it's a self-study system. And so it really is up to you to know your keys more so than any expert would be able to tell you. Like the real authentic Gene Keys journey happens inside your own experience. So if you want someone to tell you who you are and what you're going to be when you grow up, it's not necessarily the best system for that. It might be frustrating to some, but if you want these guideposts and this deep cornucopia of wisdom about how to understand who you really are and to make your way through your own journey in life, there's no system like it. And so there is this deep need to do it yourself, and yet walking the path with many others and doing it in a collective field just makes it so much easier and more accessible. And like there's support on the journey. You know that you're not doing it alone. Because sometimes when you face a shadow, when you face a lesser part or a trauma or a trigger from the past, it can feel intense. And so having the field and others there can help that transition from shadow to gift actually be a little bit easier. It's smoother, filled with grace. And so we did the activation sequence, which is the sort of beginning part where you anchor in your genius. We did that a few months ago. And now we're just journeying into the beginning of the Venus sequence. You can still join for a few more days, but we're closing the gate pretty quickly here by July 1st. I think we will have closed the gate. Um, but it's possible if you're really hearing this now and you want to ask, we may be able to open the gate. You can contact us at support@genekeys.com. But the point is that now we're in this deeper journey that moves up through the heart of the profile. So we start in the activation on the outer spheres, and now we move through our relational traps and triggers and the Venus transmission. And it's really about how to keep the heart open through the midst of our conditioning. And there's no deeper kind of journey, I think, through the gene keys. It really is the heart and the blood and the sort of womb of the transmission. It really is this um, deeply transformative space. And in that space, sometimes you run into old wounds, traps, and triggers. And so there is a lot of power and care and transformation alive in the field. And so we'll be doing that for the next 6 months through November. And then we'll take a little pause for the new year, and then we'll begin the final piece, which is the pearl sequence. And this is the prosperity sequence, this triangle at the top of the chart. And it's so when we learn how to anchor our genius with the activation sequence, then we can really do a lot of the internal healing and a relational healing to be able to return non-love with love is the goal there. Staying open through our traps and triggers, then we're able to release that, release our prosperity into the world, to release our sense of service and purpose into the world. And so that's that upper triangle. And so it's a really profound journey. It's the first time that we're doing it in sequence for over a period of 18 months. And so it's quite a powerful and beautiful experience. And with it, Richard has released his newest writings, which are writing specific keynotes for every gene key and line. So we've been talking about these 6 lines of the hexagram of the I Ching. So there's 6 different kind of unique energetics to each gene key. And so there's these amazingly specific and beautiful sage lines, he's calling it. And so it's a lot of wisdom from the sage, which is just bringing, I've been studying it for what, 12 years now. And these new sage lines are just bringing whole new torrents of understanding and beauty to my journey. And so in some ways it's tried and tested. It's a beautiful way that we journey through these, and it's also new and emerging.
Let's dive into the Hologenetic Profile. So here we got what is called the hologenetic profile, and it is kind of something that anybody can go to the genekeys.com and they can put in their birth database, and then they can have a look at this and see how it resonates. But we are going to illustrate what you were just saying now, Jesse. So basically, in your life's work, you got the 4th gene key and you got a line 5. So that is moving from the shadow of intolerance through the gift of understanding to the city of forgiveness. And the line 5 is fix solution, and then moving down pathway of challenge. That is then the 49th gene key and the line 5 as well. So whenever you have, whatever number you have here in life's work, you'll also have in evolution. And that is the shadow of reaction and the gift of revolution and the city of rebirth. And then we move across here, break through to the radiance sphere. And that here you got the 8th gene key in a line 2. So that is the shadow of mediocrity and the gift of style and the city of exquisiteness. And then moving down pathway of core stability, the gene key you spoke about, which is an incredible, beautiful key. The 14th gene key, which also has this symbol of prosperity and making fire by friction, etc. The shadow of compromise, the gift of competence, and then the city of bounty, bounteousness, and also here line 2. So I think if we begin with that, I think I can't really imagine any more important journey than for any of us really than to move through this from intolerance. And putting a little bit of a creative spin on it, there's many things in the world that I find completely intolerable.
Hmm.
Uh, but moving from that spectrum of the shadow of intolerance through understanding to forgiveness, and
Hmm.
that is your life's work. So, what does it mean that it's your life's work, and what does intolerance? What has it been for you, the journey?
So it's interesting. So the life's work is sort of the initiation space of the profile. Oftentimes it's the best place to begin, right? It's where the activation sequence starts, and in many ways it's where we begin in life. And so it's represented by the light of the sun on the day that you were born. And so astrologically, it's your sun sign. So this would be my Leo sun. And oftentimes, if people are going to guess about your nature, oh, you must be a Leo or whatever, they are guessing your sun sign. And so this is a very prominent um, placement for how much space it takes up in your psyche. And to me, the life's work is sort of the mask that we wear when we go and do out in the world. So I don't mean mask as something that we hide behind, but sort of the shape of our personality that the light of our sun projects through. So, psychologically, it is sort of the frequency of energy that people get when we express ourselves authentically. And so your life's work will be probably something fairly impactful. And you may be challenged by the shadows. You may recognize the gifts, and you may be like, you may recognize the cities as well, but you may be sort of challenged to be like, wow, look at the expansiveness of that dream. And for me, that was really the journey. When I first heard the shadow of intolerance, I went, "Oh, I'm not really intolerant." I think culturally people should have freedom and sovereignty to do what they want to do. Whether it's I don't have a lot of racial intolerance or sexist intolerance or society or cultural and so there was some part of me that was like, oh, I guess I'm not very intolerant. Which is a funny joke because I'm extremely intolerant when things aren't efficient. Like when I love efficiency, I love kindness, I love care. So one of them is I'm a big skier, and so when you are in a maze, waiting on the lift line, you're supposed to rotate, and it alternates like a zipper, and you're supposed to just be aware of who's next to you and trade. And when you do, it's like a zipper. It works flawlessly. There's no question of who's next and who's not. But it's funny to me because I really become super intolerant when someone tries to put two two groups through the zipper, and I'm like, what are you doing? And there's this totally intolerant part of myself that will actually make it uncomfortable where I'll say it to someone. I'll let them know like, hey, this is like a zipper and you're putting two spokes through the zipper or whatever it is. And so I joke, but it is this notion of there is a way and an order that is part of the cosmos. And when something is not part of that way, I just am deeply challenged by it. And so again would be merging on the highway or something, that zipper notion, that it just makes everything move with grace and ease. And when it doesn't, I become very, very intolerant. And so this is coupled with the shadow of reaction in that programming partner, in that those first two spheres, and they're interrelated. And so you can see how intolerant reaction can be a real thing, and they can kind of spark each other. And so a lot of my life has been trying to bring understanding to why something isn't efficient or why something actually would be better expressed in a new way. And so for me, intolerance is very connected to the left brain. It sits in the left side of the head in the body graph, and so it's very much connected to the logical order of things. And so intolerance is like when you close your mind and you grip onto this is how it is, this is how it should be. It's not that way, and it can be a very intense shadow that in its global view can be some of these themes of like war or slavery or genocide. Like it really has some very global kind of horrors connected to the shadow of intolerance, being intolerant of another person's religion or culture or faith or skin tone or sexual orientation or whatever it is. And it's so for me, it was easy to be like, oh, I'm not those things. I'm not some global tyrant or some, thing. But recognizing, oh, I have my own intolerances. I have my own space where my mind, my logical mind, clutches onto something and thinks that it has the right answer and that this other thing is the wrong answer. And so it creates this really divided nature of consciousness. And so for me, the journey from intolerance to understanding is unbelievable. And I obviously love to understand. I have all these books, all these sources of reading and challenging myself to get deeper into currents of understanding, to understand older texts and new ideas and things that are outside of my culture, things that weren't taught to me in school. And this journey to understanding to me is like opening the mind. It's the opposite of clenching onto facts and opening the mind to receive new perception, new understanding. And this can help us soften those intolerances by understanding someone else's culture. You're less and less intolerant and more understanding of someone else's experience. And understanding to me is one of the farthest ranging gifts where there's just a cornucopia of potential knowledge, and there's always more to be understood. And there's obviously like an infinite number of books, near infinite number of books in the world, and systems of knowledge and understanding. And so there can be a very voracious experience of this seeking of knowledge or understanding. And yet, to me, understanding is really a holographic kind of expression. It's recognizing it's not about clenching onto facts. That's still intolerance. I know the way. I know this. I have this piece. It's recognizing that depending upon how you perceive something, you can see it from many different dimensions. So I like to think of um, what does something look like when I look at it through my eyes? What does something look like when I look at it from this perspective or this perspective or upside down? What if I turned it inside out? What if I was inside the box looking out? What if I was above it? What if I was below it? What if it was 1,000 miles wide? What if it was a pinpoint and I was able to look at it? This type of understanding to me really pushes it beyond just learning more things from books or from more people, but this holographic flexibility of consciousness itself to be able to perceive directly. But that is um, it's always challenged. To not collapse or clutch for knowledge is a constant trap of intolerance. So to me, there is a deep underside to even this pursuit for knowledge that understanding brings. So in my favorite part is like this long journey through understanding eventually brings us to this city of forgiveness. And it is so amazing and humbling to recognize that the city of forgiveness does not need to understand. It washes us clear from the need to know. It doesn't need to read another book or experience another thing. It's like when you finish the book and you shed this tear. So in the I Ching, it's mountain over water. And I always think of this like sacred spring The one that's most dear to my heart that I've spent a lot of time at is Mount Shasta, which is this beautiful holy mountain with sacred water that flows out of the bottom of the mountain. And it's like forgiveness is this this holy water, this clear water that can cleanse the need to know, the need to understand, and it literally washes this it's like a baptism or something that frees us from our need to even know. And so in many ways, this journey through the fourth gene key is a really archetypal one that has its hands in the nastiest aspects of slavery and genocide and war, and also the cornucopia of study and knowledge and just the overwhelming abundance of like being engaged with all of the aspects of life. And in its end, some of that most sacred and elusive magic that has the ability to transform and change any relationship, the relationship between us and our creator, the relationship between us and our parents, us and our children, uh, forgiveness for the great tyrants of time. There is no end to the potency and the power of the subtle magic of forgiveness. And in many ways, it's the energy of the great masters that have taught much about forgiveness. And it's one thing to forgive a harsh word or a misstep by our partner or our friend. And this is where we can practice forgiveness in a tangible thing. It's another when we're given these gauntlets to forgive. Like, how do you forgive the unforgivable? How do you forgive genocide? How do you forgive a life of neglect? Some of these bigger pieces. And so there's been much wisdom that I've had to earn and learn through my life about being able to forgive the unforgivable. And in the end, all of the external forgiveness is just preparing us for that deepest journey, which is to forgive self, to forgive the divine, to forgive life itself, and has an extremely transformative potential that is actually connected to the fifth line. And so the fact that I have my life's work in the fourth gene key in the fifth line, there's just like an extra intensity there to really rely on that power of forgiveness to even go beyond the understanding. And you may have noticed on my chart, I have the fourth gene key at the top, at the pearl, and the IQ. So I have it placed 3 different times in my own profile. And so for me, this is a calling to not just understand it. Oh, yeah, I've got that. I cracked that code. Yeah, if you go to the full profile,
Yeah,
it's
so
in the
yeah,
top sphere, right below it in the pearl sphere, and then down into the left in the IQ sphere. There's this triple whammy of the fourth gene key, and it's funny. So I find that when you have a key in one space, there's a specific place that it kind of lives in your psyche. When you have multiple placements, it's like make sure you don't bypass this or don't think that you understand this key. You have to look at it with fresh eyes in a fresh way. And so perhaps just a personal kind of share the gauntlet of forgiveness that has been laid down in my life has been connected with my father. It's been very challenging to forgive my father. How do you love the unlovable parts of I'm not going to go into the whole story, but how do you forgive unforgivable actions? How do you forgive the unforgiven or the unforgivable? And so it's been this conundrum that like I've been able to forgive my mother and I've been able to forgive my friends and my lovers and my enemies, but like this notion of forgiving my father has been so challenging. And what is so beautiful, I pulled his chart, and in his pearl sphere, he has the 4.5. So he has this same key and in the fifth line right there. And it was just this reminder of the beautiful synchrony that this profile and the keys provide. And so it really reminds me that forgiveness is never done. It's an active process that comes in waves like a sacred medicine, and it's something that we continually return to. And so I'm just so grateful for the keys and the profiles to help bring this wisdom into my life and to be reflected in my father's chart and my chart, and keep supporting me on what has sometimes been a quite challenging journey, that relationship with father. And so yeah, forgiveness has been, um, without the gene keys and without the profile, if I had to name one of the challenges in my life, it would be to actually forgive and to forgive everyone and everything. And if I had to name one of the joys of my life, it's to understand and to understand many cultures and many unseen, beautiful systems. And so it really is written into the codes of my lived experience before I found the gene keys.
Yeah, yeah, very beautiful. I was feeling a little bit my own intolerance when I was screen sharing and I couldn't find myself my way. But this is my chart, so we can see we'll focus on the lines here. So I also got a line 5 in life's work and in evolution. And then I've got 1 here and 1 here. And so this is a 5-2 profile, and this is a 5-1 profile. I would love to inquire a little bit more into line 5 in life's work and evolution, and then the line 2 in radiance and purpose.
Yeah, that line 5 is beautiful and terrible, I would say, as all things are sometimes. A blessing and a curse, a yin and a yang. Um, and so it's really beautiful that the hexagram is built in these 6 lines, and it's actually broken into 2 trigrams as well. So there's the first 3 lines and the top 3 lines, and they're known as the personal trigram in the lower and the transpersonal trigram in the upper. And so there's all sorts of, beautiful understanding that can come from looking at these hexagrams. And the middle of the hexagram of the trigram, these 3 lines, is oftentimes the point of power. And so the second line is a point of power in the lower trigram. And this is connected to the belly or the hara, the Dan Tien in the Taoist tradition. It's the point of energy in the solar plexus that holds the reservoir of our physical vitality. And then there's the upper trigram, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth lines. And this is the seat of power of the upper trigram, and the transpersonal is that fifth line. But if you put it all together in the full hexagram, the fifth line is sort of the throne room or the place of power. It connects the throat and the third eye. It connects the mind and the ability to communicate it. And so in many ways, it's sort of the megaphone of how power expresses. And so there are a lot of themes that come with all fifth lines, which is this notion of power, which can be quite triggering. Some people don't want power. Other people misuse power, and they sort of use it to abuse and control and all of those things. And it's very difficult to get it right. And so power is also highly connected to projection and the projection field. And so if you don't seize your power, if you don't use your power, if you don't sit on the throne and communicate your truth with wisdom and grace, people are going to say, you're not using your power. What's wrong with you? You're letting us down. And on the other side, if you misuse your power, if you sit on the throne and become a tyrant or use your words to belittle or to control or to manipulate or something like that, people always have this like uh, misunderstanding of that misuse of power. And so it's a really delicate balance of how do I naturally sit and communicate my power without impinging or negatively affecting those around me. And so there's a huge journey to understand that sort of piece, and it will always be different in every kind of moment of life and different experience. And it's very subtle in certain ways. Like one of the things that they say about the fifth line is a common experience of the fifth line is coming into a situation and people go, "Oh, great, you're here to fix this." It's given the keynote of the fixer. You have the wisdom, the power, the knowledge, like whatever it is, this certain thing that can fix it. And so sometimes you come into a space and people put you on a pedestal. They hand you the mantle of power. They hand you the microphone. They hand you the title and say, "Okay, you're here to fix it." So you're put up on a pedestal. And then whether you fix it or not, at some point, whether it's today, in an hour, in a month, in a year, they realize, oh, wait, you didn't fix all of our problems. You didn't do what we felt that you were going to do. And so now you're thrown off the pedestal. Now you're the devil. And so I've had some pretty potent experiences of wearing this mask of yin and yang, of like, I'm the good boy that's here to help save everyone. Oh, just kidding. I'm the worst. I'm the devil. I'm the bad guy. Oh, just kidding. I'm here actually. And this whole notion of shifting these masks. And so the journey of living with a fifth line, especially in the life's work, especially with the 4.5 as life's work, because we've said it, and maybe we can go into it a bit, but the fourth gene key rules the fifth line. And so it's connected to the seven sacred seals, and this journey of forgiveness, really the forgiveness of the fourth gene key heals the guilt and washes clean that sense of the guilt from not wielding your power correctly. But it's basically this powerful journey to understand how to sit on your throne, sit on your lily pad, as my teacher says, like sit in your energy to speak your truth without getting caught up in everyone else's understanding or projection of who you are, what you're supposed to do, what you're doing right, what you're doing wrong. So in many ways, there's this a challenge of all fifth lines of to be misunderstood, and it really is a deeper calling to have authentic connection to our true nature, to our true expression, and to be able to serve, to use the power to serve the benefit of all without clutching it or grasping it or misusing it in one way, or not claiming it, not speaking our truth, not standing and sharing our voice for the benefit of all. And doesn't mean that any of these lines are better or worse. These are just the ways the energy tends to express. And each one of these six lines has its unique, beautiful, potent, and important expression, and also some of these traps or triggers or shortcomings that can come from it. And so if you have a fifth line in the life's work and evolution, you either have a first line or a second line below. And so it's nice that we have this symmetry, because there's only two types that have that fifth line. And so we represent those here today. It's quite nice to reflect on.
Yeah, no, I think it's good. So if we just, hopefully I can do it without being intolerable sharing here. So if we go here, so we're in the activation sequence, we've been in the sphere of purpose, and we're going into the Venus sequence. But so the shadow aspect of the second line. So the second line is a natural, right? But the shadow aspect is accuser, and repressive is burying your head in the sand, and reactive is responding with angry outburst, and then the main block is you're unaware of your effect on others. And the gift is the natural, and the inner strength is responding to life spontaneously. And the outer strength is being at peace with others. And highest potential, your easygoing nature allows everyone around you to relax. And that is physicality through relating. And then you look at my line 1 here. So that is either 4-1 or 5-1 profile, but that is the shadow is the loner and repressive, that's not standing up for yourself. And then the reactive is forcing your point of view. And the main block, you're driven by your need to feel secure. And the gift here is the anchor, and the inner strength is standing up for yourself in a firm but kind way. And the outer strength, listening to the needs of others. And the highest potential, your confidence makes others feel secure. And this is physicality through groundedness. So the line 2 is then 5-2 or 6-2. I would love to invite you to share a little bit more about the line 2 in the sphere of purpose. I find it fascinating. And maybe the theme of denial. How do you contemplate denial?
Yeah, so I find it quite beautiful. So the way that these types work is that there's like a large section of time where people are a 5-1, and then there's a large section where people of time each day or each month or each year, whatever, where people become a 6-2. But there's this really kind of narrow margin where the 5-1 becomes the 5-2 and then the 6-2. And so there's like these larger sections where most people are a 5-1, a very small window where they become a 5-2, and then a large section where they're a 6-2. And then it happens with all of the 12 types where there are 6 large sections and then these 6 sort of cusp sections. And so there aren't very many 5-2s compared to 5-1s or 6-2s. And so I find it interesting to kind of riff and explore on that. It's been helpful for me to really try to uncover, just as you said, how do you contemplate denial? And I think it's a good kind of conundrum because denial doesn't know things, and it often denies that it doesn't know things. It's like this double force of not knowing. And at its negative trait is a terror. It's this notion of, like, if I had to describe the second line, oftentimes it would be a pointing finger would be one of the descriptions. Another, that in human design system, they call it the hermit, which I find interesting and a bit elusive. But I'm a hermit for sure. But I'm also called out of my cave. And so I'm drawn out and have to come out of the cave and come share and things like this. But in the Gene Keys, oftentimes the second line is also known as the dancer or the natural. And so I find that that is quite beautiful to express, where the dancer isn't necessarily thinking things. It's not being like, oh, what am I going to do? I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do the other. There's just this natural movement and flow of energy, and it's quite beautiful. It's quite contagious, and it can be um, just a sort of a beautiful spectacle to behold sometimes. Like a really beautiful dancer can sort of draw people's attention and just be like, wow. And so my favorite way of like recognizing this energy is that there is this hermit nature. There is this ability, like this need to be private and to be in our own energy and to not be on stage all the time. But at some point, the music plays, the curtain comes apart, the lights come on, and the dancer is called onto stage. And there is this expression of this time, and there's something very naturally beautiful that can express in that moment. And then the music fades, the curtain closes, and someone else comes onto stage. And then the dancer returns backstage to rest, to be in their own energy, to recharge. And so this is how I've kind of brought some awareness around the energy of that hermit and the dancer, because sometimes they seem a bit at odds, but I've been really have come to know that in my own experience. But what's been really humbling and enlightening and beautiful in my journey is with this life's work of understanding what I know well. Like I can be asked kind of any question about what I know, and like I can have some sense of answer. Might not be correct, might not be beautiful, might not be everything, but like there is this ability to know what I know. But this second line below with the wound and the shadow of denial, I realize that what I don't know, I don't even know that I don't know. Like I am so blind and so dumb about what I don't know. And it's like totally humbling to just like realize, oh my God, I didn't even know that I didn't know that. Like I just, and so sometimes for me, I get this self-confidence or false self-confidence of like, oh, I know what's kind of going on. I know where we are. I know what's happening. But that lower second line in me oftentimes will have these experiences where I think I know what's going on, and all of a sudden I'm like, where am I? I'm out in the woods, way far away from home. I don't know anywhere where I am. Like, am I in danger? Am I not? You know, there's this. So for me, there is this real difference in my experience of that fifth line up top and this second line in the bottom. And when they're in their shadow natures or in their less than kind of states, they can be quite challenging and at odds and difficult to integrate. But like all things, when yin and yang, or conscious and unconscious, spirit and body are actually allowed to have relationship and to actually come into embodied experience together, there's an amazing amount of beauty that can come when the accuser doesn't say, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? This is your fault. This is that. But really accepts, okay, we're just where we are. There, let this natural energy flow, just really trusting that it doesn't need to know in order to do its role. It just needs to be and to let it go, to just let it rip. And so I often like to think of the natural sometimes isn't the best teacher because it's like you just naturally know how to do it. Like I think of sometimes the best hitters in baseball don't know how to teach anyone how to hit because they just do it. They just stand at the plate and they just crack and they hit it over the fence and you just do it. How do I do it? I don't know. You just do it. And so there's some of this unconscious denial or this unconsciousness that can be part of this. It doesn't mean it's bad as long as you trust in it and really go with it. And so similarly, you know, this can be like musicians. Some people just know how to play. They just have the ear, they just have the skill, pick it up and play. Can they teach someone else how to do it? Like, it's better to have someone else teach these things because they know more about it. But like, it doesn't mean that you can't like be a great doer. In fact, many times it is that natural that can just pick it up and play. That's beautiful. And so it's a bit of a different energy than the 5-1. The 5-1 has its own unique signature, and I just find it a beautiful kind of subtle shift, the difference between the 5-1 and the 5-2.
Thanks so much for sharing, Jesse. I have one more question, which I think is an important question. And this is based on, so this is my creative thinking. I'm not saying this is necessarily, is there a real understanding or is it like, it's my understanding. But when we look at forgiveness, and we have forgiveness many places in your chart, as you said, there are so many things in the world. There is war, there is genocide. I mean, with my eyes, I see war, I see genocide, I see obvious injustices, I see cruelty, I see so many actions that seem wrong. So if we look here with the 60th gene key, then, and you have the shadow of limitation, realism, and justice. So my question is, all these things, there are things that are happening that are wrong. And there are, as you say, actions and doings that are unforgivable. And yet I know if I can let go and forgive, it's better for me, because if I keep drinking the poison of resentment, it's only going to make me sick and ill. And at the same time, the cause of justice needs to flow in the world. There are things that are wrong. Maybe there's the law of karma, maybe there's legal action, but how do you reconcile it?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, and it's honestly a bit of a conundrum that I think Gene Keys is good at bringing up conundrums, and sometimes it's able to settle those conundrums, but it really is a system kind of built on paradox or koans of combining yin and yang. How do you allow yin and yang to come together? I think it's a beautiful part of the Eastern philosophy is that it's not white or black, or it's not uh, true or false the way that the Western paradigm is, that all things are these interconnections in this dance of yin and yang. And so I think that having this Western philosophy and the Eastern philosophy, again, is combining these opposites to be able to hold paradox and have it have a relationship in the center. And so perhaps the best way for me to understand the 60th gene key is is that it's connected by a channel in human design to the third gene key that I also have twice in my chart. I have it in my SQ in the center and my core wound or vocation. And so they create this channel in the body graph. And I think it's best for me to kind of describe it in that way. Um, the third gene key is known as difficulty at the beginning, and it is this mutative energy. It is the playful innocence of the child that is, it's playful, but it also creates new things. Allegedly, all genetic mutation, all new molecular forms, all new kind of aspects and experiences, forms of consciousness originate with the third gene key, this kind of mutation of innocence and freshness, innovating new things into the world. And so it's very, at its shadow level, it's chaos, right? Like not everything that innovates into something new is successful or coherent. And there's plenty of adaptations that happen in nature that don't work. And so then therefore they'd kind of die out. And so it can be quite chaotic. And so there's this very like youthful and expressive and innovative kind of energy moving through the third gene key. And the opposite of that is the 60th gene key. So the 60th gene key is known as limitation in the I Ching. And it is basically the form that brings everything towards death or towards like limitation. It's the boundary condition of the cosmos. It's the ending of many things. And so there is this unbelievably beautiful dual nature that the 60 is the limitation that is oftentimes talked about as the banks of the river. And so this is the space that says, well, no, the water doesn't go over here and it doesn't go over here, and it certainly doesn't go into the town over here or onto the road. It goes right here. And that this is where the river is going, and it's what keeps the river safe And then the third gene key is the water that chaotically and playfully laps and bubbles and bounces down through the river. And so these two forces seem so at odds, and yet they're very, when they're in balance, they make everything kind of perfect. And so this notion of limitation, realism, and justice in the 60th gene key is powerful. And there's a few metaphors beyond the banks of the river that I think are really important. And so for me, I've kind of changed my expression of the name of the gift from realism to real magic. And it's sort of how everything is directed, and by limiting things, by having banks to the river, this is how we direct energy. So if you think of the banks to the river, if they're flat and wide, the river is going to be very placid and calm. If the banks of the river go sharp and tight, it creates vortices and rapids, and it's quite strong. And if the banks of the river go down, you have a waterfall and it's completely in free fall. And so there's a powerful magic to the banks of the river and to how we shape it. And so every magical tradition or magical experience has the sacred circle. It has this banks to the river. You open a sacred space and you confine it to here. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. We close that sacred circle. And so all magic, all consciousness expressing in the physical world has these banks to the river that keep us safe, it keeps us contained, and it actually focalizes the power. Consciousness is a vast energy, but if you use these banks of the river to focus it and bring it into an experience, this is where real magic has the ability to penetrate from the etheric world into the world of form and do actual real magic here and now on this physical plane. And that this is some of the power that I think can direct the tides of justice, the flow of justice. And so there's much injustice in the world. Perhaps some of my favorite words on justice come from Martin Luther King, who, broke a lot of odds and cultural norms of nonviolence, but really standing for his people. And he said, the great arc of time bends towards justice, and that no matter what we do, even if you have victories or failures in this moment, like to stand for what is right, like there will eventually be this arcing towards justice. And the banks of the river hopefully they'll meander, and they'll go here and they'll go flat and they'll go rapid and all of those things, but eventually all all rivers lead back to the sea, and all injustices eventually, hopefully, will come into peace, whether it's the laws of karma that happen after our incarnation. But I really truly believe that it isn't just for an after time, that standing by and forming healthy banks to the river, using that sense of limitation to focalize our power and intention, it does have a way of shifting and moving the energy. And it's really important to be aligned with the sense of service and to the benefit of all beings. I think that real magic has real exchange of energy, and so be careful what you're intending. Be careful what you're fighting, what you're doing with your consciousness. And so there's a real importance of wielding the power of consciousness in a beneficial way. Um, so yeah, that's a little riff on that.
It's beautiful. I do love this, that magic is not in opposition to common sense. I think that is very beautiful. Just we have a few themes. We are kind of coming to an end, but speaking of consciousness, human beings need, desire, journey with altering consciousness, and then we got the importance of men's work, and then we got the importance of well, Clubhouse, what's happening with Clubhouse.
Mm.
So those three kind of, so first your journey with alteration of consciousness, where you are, and then men's work, and then your presence on Clubhouse now in the time of change.
Yeah, so the alteration of consciousness has been a big part of my journey. And it has been, I'm the son of an addict, you know what I mean? So I experienced the forces of marijuana before I even knew what it really was around my father and things like that. And so I was kind of brought into some of that world. I smoked very young and sort of had this experience of, whoa, there's something different in consciousness that can be experienced in alternate states, and there's a real power there. I also was able to see the extremely detrimental effects of that over time, over families or relationships. And so I've had a very interesting kind of go with that. I really tend to believe that there is great power in these chemicals, substances, spirits to alter consciousness, and that when used in the proper framework and foundations, a lot of these plant medicines, especially, can be quite advantageous to the journey of self-reflection, the journey of healing, and that some of the more chemically ones or the spirits, alcohol and more of the overt, like drugs, as we would call them, have extremely detrimental effects in the way. And even if they're quite socially acceptable, that they can be quite um, divisive and challenging over time. And so for me, alcoholism has run through my family, drug addiction has run through my family. And so for me, I'm actually 2 years sober now, from all substances. And it felt like a really powerful part of my journey to sort of end some of that genetic, unconscious inheritance of some of those shadow traits or um, addictive tendencies. And so it's been very empowering, a little bit lonely, a little bit boring, to be honest, to not alter my consciousness at the end of the day with a beer or a cocktail, or to, take some plant medicine and vision about the cosmos, or listen to music or taste food that feels different and exquisite. And I don't demonize those experiences. They were a really beautiful and sacred part of my coming into my incarnation. But in this phase of my life with a young child, I just realized, like, this ends now. And this lineage of allowing the unconscious addictions to just roll down the hill, like, I'm going to do what I can to set this bank of the river to allow my child to not have the stories of an alcoholic father or an addicted father. And so it feels like a bit of a warrior's journey for me to really stand on that, and to do what I can to allow her to be fully her without my baggage kind of spoiling the fertile ground that she is coming. And so with that, I've been super sober. And also, I just recently did an ayahuasca ceremony with a traditional Sangha and community, followed up by a San Pedro, journey that is connected to prayer and healing and song and some of the traditional ways that these psychoactive medicines are done for healing. And so I'm not demonizing the nature of altering our consciousness with sacred medicines, but being highly selective of the intention and the point and the purpose for which they used, and also the community and the experience that we use them in. So it's been a huge part of my journey, and yet it's definitely shifting into another phase. And for me, I have had this notion that psychedelics are like uh, keys that unlock doors in our consciousness. and they work. Sometimes you take a psychedelic and it puts you through a door in your consciousness into an altered space. And yet the true nature is that that door is not actually locked. And so the psychedelic is the key that unlocks that door. But the true nature of consciousness is that door could be opened at any time. And there's many practices, breath work, meditation, yoga, ecstatic states, things like that, that can allow us to move through that. And that the psychedelic might open that door, but we too can open that door. And the fundamental reality is that we created that door to kind of close and protect ourselves to stay in a normal state of consciousness so that we're not just overwhelmed in this sensory data overload of the experience of being in a body. And so in many ways, I think we made those doors of consciousness to sort of keep us safe and sane. And so yeah, I honor their magic and also have a bit of mm, limitation around them and use them in their right space at the right time for the right state of mind. Mm. And with that, yeah, we have a men's group that feels really connected to that for me of like having allies and support on the journey to manhood, the journey of fatherhood, and this sort of circle of brothers that's forming around the Gene Keys transmission. And it feels really important to be able to hold and ground that with a field of brothers. And so that's open. We meet monthly on the last Tuesday of each month. And so if any men are listening and feeling called to join a bit of brotherhood around the Gene Keys transmission, we can be found at the Whole Men's Gathering. So I'll share a link about that. And we do something on Clubhouse as well in my house called the Council Fire. We do a monthly call there that's open to men and women, and it's more of just an opportunity to explore where Gene Keys and men's work cross. But yeah, I've been a host for the Gene Keys for 4.5 years now, speaking on all sorts of topics, doing the weekly pulse, where we contemplate the Gene Key of the week every week for 4.5 years. It's been an amazing journey with two other amazing hosts. You've had Katrini as a guest and Ibby. And it's been such a treasure trove of space to share transmissions, to really connect to that voice and sharing the wisdom of all my fifth lines, but also to be able to receive the wisdom of others, of the hosts and the community. And so, yeah, Gene Keys is shifting and changing with the new technology, the new apps. And so we're pausing that. So we just did our last recording of the weekly pulse this week and Gene Keys and parenting this week. And so there's a bit of uh, just honoring, cherishing what was, and also opening into the wild unknown and the space of pausing, uh, kind of into a little bit of a vacuum and an unknown before something new emerges. So I'll be continuing some contemplations on my own Clubhouse channel called the Council Fire. We do Gene Keys and Myth, where we work on the mythological themes, magic that arises from many different cultures around the world. But also, looking forward to a little bit of a pause there. And sometimes it's scarcity that really attunes us into knowing what needs to fill that void. So we're taking a bit of a pause to really listen to what we had and honor that, but also listen to what wants to emerge from the silence on the other side of it. So,
Beautiful. Just tell the listeners where people can find you and
yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's just really special to be here. And yeah, you can find me on Clubhouse at the Council Fire house. You can also connect to me on the Gene Keys website on my guides directory page. So if you search Jesse Chesnutt on genekeys.com, you can find me there. That has links to my website, which is keysoftheiching.com. Here I've written my own contemplations on the more explicit connection of the I Ching elements, the I Ching kind of history and the Gene Keys experience with the calendar. So I have a lot to share there. I think those are the easiest ways to find me. I'm also on Instagram. I don't post often, but those would be the easiest ways to find me. And thank you so much, Sven. It's been really such a pleasure to connect with you and to riff on some of these beautiful themes. So thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we had a beautiful conversation. I'll put all the links in the description, etc. And if there were any words that anybody found difficult, we'll also put the glossary of empowerment, etc. But I think we've been quite educational, and we've explained very well, both of us. So thank you so much, Jesse, and enjoy your day. And
yeah, thanks. You too, Sven. Appreciate it. Look forward to connecting soon. Thanks.